Take me with you, please. His choice changed both their destinies forever. Ethan lived in a small town that seemed almost forgotten by time. The streets were lined with old brick houses, their paint faded and chipped, and the sidewalks were cracked in many places. Most people in town knew each other by name. Life moved slowly, almost as if the world outside had no influence here. Ethan had grown up in this quiet place, never imagining he would meet anyone or anything that could truly change him. He worked at a local bookstore, a job he had taken after finishing school because it was simple and safe. Every day was much like the day before. He woke up, had a cup of coffee, walked to work, spent hours arranging books and helping customers, and then returned home in the evening. It was a life that many might call boring, but to Ethan, it felt comfortable. Still, there was a quiet loneliness that he had accepted as part of who he was. Ethan had always been careful. He didn't take unnecessary risks, didn't make many friends, and rarely allowed anyone to get close to him. His parents had moved to a different city years ago, and although they called often, he rarely visited. He was used to being alone. Even in his own home, he often felt a sense of emptiness. The walls were neatly arranged, the furniture clean and orderly, but there was no laughter, no sound of life except for the occasional hum of his refrigerator or the ticking of a small clock on the wall. Sometimes, late at night, he would sit by the window and watch the world outside. He would see families walking home together, children running through the streets, dogs playing in yards, and he would feel a strange mix of happiness and sadness. It was on one such rainy evening that Ethan's life began to shift in a way he could not have imagined. The rain was gentle at first, creating tiny puddles that reflected the streetlights in blurry golden circles. The sky was gray, heavy with clouds that threatened to pour more water at any moment. Ethan had stayed late at the bookstore that day, helping a customer find a rare book. As he stepped outside, the smell of wet earth and rain filled his senses. He adjusted his coat and began walking home, his shoes making soft splashes on the wet pavement. Then he saw it, a small figure huddled under a bus stop, shivering and drenched. At first, Ethan thought it was a pile of trash or an old bag someone had left behind. But as he came closer, he realized it was a dog. The dog was thin, with matted fur that stuck to its small frame, and its eyes were wide and full of fear. It looked up at him, and for a moment Ethan felt a jolt in his chest. There was something about the dog's gaze, a quiet pleading, almost as if it were speaking to him without words. The rain fell harder now, and the dog trembled violently, trying to make itself small under the bus stop roof. Ethan stopped in his tracks. He had never owned a pet, and the thought of taking care of a dog seemed overwhelming. He knew nothing about feeding, grooming, or training one, and yet something in him stirred. He couldn't just leave the dog there, alone in the rain. He felt a strange connection, a tug at his heart that he couldn't explain. Slowly he knelt down and extended his hand, careful not to scare the animal. The dog hesitated for a moment, its body stiff with fear, but then, almost imperceptibly, it inched closer. "Hey, little one," Ethan whispered, his voice soft and calm. "You, you." "Hey, you don't have to be alone." The dog tilted its head and let out a soft whine. Ethan reached into his pocket and pulled out a small snack he always kept for himself. He offered it to the dog, who sniffed it cautiously before nibbling it gently. It was a tiny act, but it felt monumental. Ethan smiled, feeling warmth spread through him in a way he hadn't felt in years. The rain continued to pour, soaking both of them, but Ethan didn't care. For the first time in a long while, he felt a sense of purpose, a feeling that he mattered to someone beyond himself. Ethan knew he couldn't leave the dog there. He looked around, thinking about what to do. His apartment wasn't large, and it had never been meant to host another living being, but he realized he didn't care about the inconvenience. He could see the trust in the dog's eyes, the silent plea that seemed to say, "Take me with you, please." Without thinking too much, he gently scooped the small creature into his arms. The dog, surprisingly light, rested its head on his shoulder, shivering but calm now that it was safe. As he walked home, Ethan spoke softly to the dog, telling it about the small comforts he could offer: a warm towel, some food, and a place to rest. The dog listened in its own way, its eyes blinking slowly as if it understood. By the time he reached his apartment, both of them were soaked, but Ethan felt a strange happiness he hadn't experienced in years. He set the dog down on a soft rug and went to fetch a towel. The dog allowed him to dry it gently, nuzzling his hand in appreciation. That night, Ethan sat on his couch, watching the dog curl up in a little ball, finally relaxed and safe. He felt a quiet sense of companionship that filled the empty corners of his heart. For hours, he couldn't stop thinking about how a single encounter on a rainy evening had brought someone new into his life. He didn't yet know the challenges he would face caring for a pet, but he also didn't mind. This small act of kindness had already changed him. In the days that followed, Ethan began to notice subtle changes in himself. He smiled more often, found joy in small routines, and even started talking to neighbors he had never spoken to before. The dog, whom he had named Max, became a part of his world. Every morning, Max would wait by the door as Ethan prepared for work, tail wagging, eyes bright with anticipation. Every evening, he would greet Ethan with quiet excitement, nudging him with his nose, demanding attention, and offering silent comfort in return. Ethan realized that Max was not just a dog. He was a teacher, a companion, and a reminder that life could surprise you when you least expected it. Something as simple as stopping on a rainy evening and offering a hand to a trembling creature had opened a door that had been closed for years. He had never imagined that a stray dog could awaken feelings of responsibility, love, and courage within him. But now he couldn't imagine life without Max. Ethan's quiet, orderly world had shifted forever, all because he had answered a silent plea. That night, as he lay in bed listening to the soft breathing of Max curled at his feet, he understood something profound. Sometimes the smallest decisions, a single choice to act with kindness, could set the stage for a future more extraordinary than he could ever imagine. From that moment on, Ethan's life was never the same. A stray dog in need had found him, and in doing so, he had found himself. After that rainy evening, Ethan's life slowly began to change. Max, the small dog he had rescued, became a constant presence in his home, and with him came a new set of responsibilities. Feeding, cleaning, walking, and caring for Max demanded time and effort, things Ethan had never really needed before. At first, he felt overwhelmed. His apartment, once neat and empty, now smelled faintly of wet fur and dog food. Towels and blankets were scattered around, and small paw prints trailed through the living room. Yet, as Ethan looked at Max, his tiny body wagging its tail and looking up at him with trust-filled eyes, Ethan felt a strange joy that made all the extra work feel worthwhile. The townspeople noticed Ethan's sudden transformation. He had always been quiet and reserved, barely talking to anyone outside of work, but now he started greeting neighbors and smiling more often. On his walks with Max, people would stop to comment on how lively the dog was and how happy Ethan seemed. At first, Ethan felt a little embarrassed by the attention. He had never been the type to seek it. But, slowly, he began to realize that Max was helping him connect with the world in ways he had never tried before. Life with Max was not always easy. The dog had habits that Ethan needed to correct, and sometimes his new companion's energy was exhausting. Max would bark at strangers passing by, chew on shoes, and wake Ethan early in the morning with enthusiastic nudges. Ethan had to learn patience, something he hadn't needed much of before. Some days he would sit on the couch, exhausted after a long walk or cleaning up a mess, wondering if he had made the right choice. But every time he looked at Max, curled up and looking at him with adoration, Ethan knew he had. The dog's unwavering trust reminded him that responsibility could be rewarding. One day, Ethan took Max to the small park near his home. It was a quiet place, with a few benches, tall trees, and a narrow path winding through green grass. Max ran freely, chasing leaves and small birds, and Ethan laughed in a way he hadn't laughed in years. Watching Max play, Ethan began to notice something he hadn't realized before. He was not just caring for a dog. He was growing too. The simple act of showing kindness, of opening his home to someone else's needs, was teaching him lessons about compassion, patience, and connection. During these walks, Ethan often thought about Max's past. Who had he belonged to before? Why had he been left alone in the rain? These questions tugged at Ethan's heart. Max had clearly been through hardships, and now he was depending on Ethan completely. The thought made Ethan feel a mix of sadness and determination. He promised himself that no matter what, he would never abandon Max. The bond between them grew stronger with each passing day, a silent understanding forming between human and dog. Ethan also began to notice changes in his own routine. He started waking up earlier, not just because Max demanded it, but because he wanted to take him on walks before the town fully woke up. The fresh morning air, the sound of birds, the quiet streets, all of it became a small part of his daily happiness. He started noticing things he had ignored before: the way sunlight fell on the rooftops, the smell of freshly baked bread from the bakery, the laughter of children walking to school. Life, which had once felt slow and dull, now seemed full of little wonders, all because he had opened his heart to a small, helpless creature. At work, Ethan noticed subtle changes too. Helping customers felt different now. He listened more attentively, smiled more often, and even started offering small advice or suggestions that he would have previously kept to himself. It was as if caring for Max had unlocked a part of him that had been quiet for years, the part that could connect with others, that could feel empathy, and that could embrace life beyond the walls of his small apartment. But not everything was easy. One evening, after a long day, Ethan returned home to find Max limping slightly. Panic surged through him as he knelt down to check the dog's paw. It looked like he had stepped on something sharp. Ethan's heart ached at the thought of Max being in pain, and he realized how deeply he had come to care for this little creature. He rushed Max to the local veterinarian, who reassured him that the injury was minor but required some care and rest. That night, Ethan stayed close to Max, comforting him, giving him gentle scratches behind the ears, and whispering soothing words. It was during moments like these that Ethan truly understood the depth of responsibility he had taken on. Max was not just a dog. He was a living being relying on him for safety, comfort, and love. And in return, Max gave Ethan something priceless: companionship, trust, and a sense of purpose. Ethan often reflected on the irony that he had spent so many years alone, thinking life was simple, only to discover that true fulfillment came from opening your heart to someone else. Neighbors began noticing the transformation too. People who had once seen Ethan as quiet and distant now greeted him warmly. Children would come to the park asking to play with Max, and Ethan found himself smiling more, talking more, and enjoying the small interactions he had previously avoided. The simple act of caring for another life had changed his social world. Where there had been distance and isolation, there was now connection. One rainy afternoon, similar to the day he had first found Max, Ethan sat by the window watching the droplets slide down the glass. Max lay beside him, resting his head on Ethan's lap. Ethan ran his fingers through the dog's soft fur, feeling the warmth and trust radiating from him. He realized that the dog's presence had not only changed his days, but had also altered how he saw the world. Small moments of kindness, small decisions to act when it mattered, could lead to profound changes in life. Ethan began thinking more deeply about choices. He realized that Max's fate had been uncertain before he stepped in, and his decision to help had set them both on a new path. Every day brought new lessons: patience when Max refused to eat immediately, courage when taking him through unfamiliar streets, and empathy when comforting him after a bad dream or loud thunder. Ethan had learned to read Max's signals, to understand his moods, and to respond with care. This relationship was teaching him lessons about responsibility, love, and trust that no book or teacher ever had. As the weeks passed, the bond between them grew stronger. Max followed Ethan everywhere. From walks to quiet afternoons on the couch, Ethan found himself sharing his thoughts aloud to Max, telling him about work, his past, or even his small hopes and fears. And though Max could not respond in words, Ethan felt understood. The dog's eyes, always attentive, always loyal, seemed to say, "I am here. You are not alone." Life with Max also brought unexpected moments of joy. One day, during a walk, Max ran excitedly toward a small family of ducks near the pond. Ethan laughed as Max tried to interact gently, careful not to scare them away. The simple joy at Max's behavior reminded Ethan to appreciate life's small pleasures. Every wag of the tail, every playful leap, every happy bark was a reminder that happiness often comes from simple moments of connection and care. Ethan started noticing that his own heart was opening in ways he hadn't anticipated. He became more willing to take small risks, like volunteering in a local animal shelter or attending town events he would have skipped before. Max had taught him courage in its quietest form: the courage to care, to act, and to embrace responsibility, even when it seemed daunting. Every challenge he faced, every small obstacle was easier with Max by his side. One evening, Ethan sat quietly in his apartment, watching Max sleep peacefully. He realized that the dog's life and his own were now intertwined in ways he could never have imagined. The bond they shared had grown beyond companionship. It had become a partnership of trust, love, and mutual care. Ethan understood that he was no longer just a man living alone. He was a guardian, a friend, and a part of something larger than himself. And so, life continued. Each day brought small challenges, small joys, and new lessons. Ethan was no longer the same man who had walked home that rainy evening weeks ago. He had discovered a new way of living, one that was full of responsibility, but also full of love, connection, and purpose. Max had arrived at the perfect moment, asking nothing more than to be cared for, and in doing so, had changed Ethan's life forever. Ethan often reflected on that first encounter in the rain. Who would have thought that one small decision, a decision to stop, to kneel, and to offer a hand, could bring such profound change? He had discovered that true life lessons often come not from grand adventures, but from the quiet moments where kindness and courage intersect. And as he watched Max wagging his tail at the sound of the approaching rain, Ethan knew that the story of their lives was only beginning. Days turned into weeks, and weeks slowly turned into months. Ethan had grown used to having Max in his life. The little dog had become more than a companion. He was a part of Ethan's daily rhythm, a source of comfort, and a reason for laughter. But life, as Ethan had learned, was never without challenges. One chilly evening, while walking Max through the quiet streets of the town, Ethan noticed something unusual. Max, who usually trotted happily beside him, suddenly stopped in the middle of the sidewalk and lifted his leg. But this time, he didn't move afterward. He stood still, staring at the ground with his ears back and tail tucked slightly. Ethan knelt down, gently trying to see what was wrong. At first, he saw nothing. But then he noticed that Max's paw was swollen. A sharp pain ran through Ethan's chest at the sight. Panic mixed with worry as he realized that Max had likely injured himself during the walk. Every step he had taken with Max until now seemed to echo in his mind. Was there something he could have done differently? How long had Max been hurting? Ethan carefully picked up his small companion, cradling him against his chest as he hurried home. Max, surprisingly, didn't resist. He rested his head on Ethan's shoulder, trusting him completely. At home, Ethan examined Max's paw more closely. The swelling was noticeable, and Max whimpered softly every time Ethan touched it. Ethan's heart sank. He knew he had to act fast. He wrapped Max gently in a towel to keep him warm and safe, and then he drove to the local veterinarian, his mind racing with worry. At the clinic, a kind vet greeted them and quickly examined Max. The news was a relief in one way, but still concerning. Max had stepped on a sharp object that had caused a minor cut and swelling. With proper care, he would recover fully, but he would need rest, medicine, and careful attention. Ethan nodded, determined to do everything the vet instructed. He drove home slowly, careful not to jostle Max, who seemed exhausted from the ordeal. Back at the apartment, he set up a small corner with blankets, a soft pillow, and a bowl of water. Max curled up immediately, tired but trusting. Ethan sat beside him for hours, stroking his fur and whispering words of comfort.
"It's okay, Max. You'll be fine."
"I've got you," he said softly. There was a calmness in Max's eyes that told Ethan he had made the right choice in bringing him home that rainy night. The next few days were challenging. Max could not walk freely, and Ethan had to carry him everywhere. Feeding him became a careful task, making sure he could eat without putting pressure on his injured paw. Cleaning up after him required more effort, and Ethan found himself exhausted by the end of each day. Yet, in those moments of care, he realized something profound. The responsibility he had taken on was not a burden. It was a gift. He had the chance to protect, nurture, and support a life that depended on him. In return, Max offered unwavering trust and companionship. Ethan also began noticing changes in himself during this period. He became more patient than he had ever been. Tasks that would have frustrated him in the past, like cleaning up messes, adjusting his schedule, or dealing with unexpected interruptions, now seemed manageable. Each act of care for Max reminded him that patience and love were powerful forces. He began to understand that life often demanded more than comfort. It demanded courage, attention, and the willingness to face challenges for the sake of someone else. One morning, as Ethan prepared breakfast for both himself and Max, he looked at the little dog lying on a soft blanket near the kitchen. Max's eyes followed him attentively, filled with trust and curiosity. Ethan smiled, realizing how much he had come to rely on this small creature for joy and companionship. Max had taught him lessons that no book or teacher could offer: the power of trust, the value of patience, and the importance of selfless care. The bond between them had grown into something that neither time nor circumstance could weaken. As Max's paw slowly healed, Ethan decided to reintroduce small walks. At first, Max could only take a few steps before needing to rest. Ethan carried him most of the way, allowing him to explore the familiar streets safely. Neighbors noticed Ethan's dedication and often stopped to comment on how devoted he was. Some even shared stories about pets they had cared for, offering advice and encouragement. Ethan listened politely, but felt that nothing they could say compared to the lessons he was learning firsthand. During one of these walks, Ethan noticed a small girl sitting alone near the park bench, crying softly. Max, sensing her distress, trotted gently toward her, nuzzling her hand with his soft nose. The girl's tears slowed and she began to pet Max carefully, her small hands trembling at first. Ethan approached slowly, asking if she was okay. She explained that she had lost her small kitten earlier that day and felt heartbroken. Ethan offered kind words and shared how caring for Max had brought him joy and responsibility. The girl listened intently, and together they watched Max play gently in the grass. In that moment, Ethan realized how Max's presence could bring comfort not only to him, but to others as well. The experience left a deep impression on Ethan. He understood that kindness and care could ripple out in ways he had never imagined. Max was not just a dog in need. He was a teacher, a companion, and a bridge connecting Ethan to the wider world. Every day, as he fed, walked, and comforted Max, Ethan saw the value of compassion in action. He also learned to anticipate Max's needs, reading the subtle signals in his behavior: the tilt of his head, the wag of his tail, the soft whine when he wanted attention. This understanding deepened their bond and strengthened Ethan's sense of purpose. One rainy evening, similar to the night Ethan had first met Max, he found himself reflecting on the journey they had taken together. The rain fell gently outside, and Max lay beside him, resting his head on Ethan's lap. Ethan stroked his fur thoughtfully, realizing how much his life had changed since that first encounter. He had discovered a part of himself he had long ignored, the part that could care deeply, connect with others, and embrace life's unpredictable moments. Max had awakened something within him, something that made him braver, kinder, and more alive. Ethan also began to understand the weight of choices. Every decision he made, whether to help Max, care for him, or simply spend time with him, carried meaning. He realized that life was full of opportunities to act with kindness, and that even small choices could have a lasting impact. Max's dependence on him had become a mirror, reflecting Ethan's own growth and capacity for love. He had learned that responsibility and compassion were inseparable, and that both could transform lives in ways he had never imagined. During this period, Ethan also noticed subtle changes in the town around him. People seemed kinder, neighbors more willing to help one another, and children more eager to care for animals. It was as if the simple act of rescuing Max had set off a ripple of positive energy in the community. Ethan felt proud, not because he wanted recognition, but because he realized that one small act of kindness could inspire others. He began volunteering at the local animal shelter, helping other animals in need, and sharing his experiences with anyone willing to listen. Max accompanied him sometimes, bringing joy to the other dogs and cats, and earning smiles from everyone he met. As weeks passed, Max's paw healed completely. The little dog was once again full of energy, running, jumping, and exploring without hesitation. Ethan felt a mixture of relief and pride. He had faced a challenge that tested his patience, commitment, and compassion, and he had emerged stronger, more confident, and more connected to the world. Max, unaware of the lessons he had taught Ethan, wagged his tail and nuzzled him, reminding Ethan that love and loyalty were simple yet powerful forces. One evening, as they sat together watching the sunset from Ethan's small balcony, he realized that life with Max had taught him something invaluable. Happiness was not found in comfort or solitude alone, but in the courage to care, the willingness to act, and the openness to trust. Max had changed him in ways he could never have imagined, and he knew that the journey they had begun together was only the start of a lifelong bond. Ethan smiled at Max, who yawned contentedly and rested his head on Ethan's lap. "We've come a long way, haven't we, boy?" he whispered. Max responded with a soft lick, as if to say, "Yes, together." And in that moment, Ethan knew that the choice he had made months ago, to take a small, trembling dog into his life, had not only saved Max, but had also changed him forever. Life was no longer predictable, quiet, or lonely. It was full of challenges, joy, responsibility, and love. And Ethan understood now more than ever that some choices, no matter how small they seem at first, could alter the course of destiny for both those who give and those who receive. Max's trust, loyalty, and love had set Ethan on a path he had never imagined, a path of courage, connection, and heart. And for the first time in his life, Ethan felt truly alive. Months had passed since Ethan first rescued Max, and their bond had grown stronger with every passing day. Max was no longer just a small dog relying on Ethan. He had become a partner in life, a source of joy, and a reminder of the love and responsibility that Ethan had discovered within himself. But life, as Ethan had learned, had a way of testing even the strongest bonds. One early morning, Ethan woke to the sound of Max barking urgently. The dog was standing at the bedroom door, ears perked, eyes wide, and growling softly. Something was wrong. Ethan quickly got out of bed, rubbing the sleep from his eyes, and followed Max into the living room. He noticed immediately that the air felt different. He could smell smoke. Panic surged through him as he realized that something serious had happened. Ethan rushed outside, carrying Max in his arms. Down the street, he saw a small fire had started in a neighbor's garage. Flames were licking the walls, and smoke was rising quickly into the sky. People had gathered at a distance, calling the fire department, but the situation looked dangerous. Without thinking twice, Ethan set Max down and ran closer, assessing how to help. Max stayed by his side, barking and growling at the flames, as if urging him to act carefully but decisively. Ethan noticed that the garage door was partially open, and inside, he could see the family's cat trapped near the back, frightened and unable to escape. The heat was intense, and the smoke made it hard to breathe. But Ethan knew he couldn't wait for the firefighters to arrive. His heart pounded, but he forced himself to stay calm. He instructed some of the neighbors to keep a safe distance while he approached the garage carefully. Max stayed close, watching his every move, offering silent support with his presence. With slow, careful steps, Ethan entered the garage. Smoke filled his lungs, making it hard to breathe, and the heat pressed against his skin. He kept his eyes on the frightened cat, speaking softly to calm it. "It's okay. I'm here. You'll be safe," he whispered, inching closer. Max's barks outside seemed to encourage him, as if reminding him that courage was not about fearlessness, but about action despite fear. Finally, he reached the cat and scooped it up gently. It trembled in his arms, but Ethan held it securely, backing out of the garage slowly, making sure not to trip or lose his footing. Once outside, he handed the cat to a neighbor waiting safely. The firefighters arrived moments later, controlling the fire before it could spread further. Ethan stood aside, breathing heavily, feeling a rush of relief and pride. He looked down at Max, who was wagging his tail vigorously, eyes shining with excitement. Ethan knelt and hugged him. "We did it, Max. We helped someone today," he said. Max licked his face as if he understood every word. And in that moment, Ethan realized just how much his life had changed since that rainy night months ago. That day, Ethan became a quiet hero in his town. Neighbors praised him for his bravery, and the family whose garage had caught fire expressed endless gratitude. But for Ethan, the real reward was not recognition. It was Max. The little dog who had first followed him in the rain had grown into a partner who gave him courage when he needed it most. Ethan reflected on how different his life would have been if he had ignored that pleading look months ago. He would have walked past the small dog, unaware that it would lead him to face challenges, embrace responsibility, and discover the depths of his own bravery. The days following the fire were filled with reflection and growth. Ethan realized that courage was not about grand gestures alone. It was built from small choices, consistent care, and the willingness to act for someone who depended on you. Max had been his first test, teaching him patience, compassion, and responsibility. Now he had proven that he could rise to challenges beyond daily life. The fire had shown him that love and trust were not passive emotions. They demanded action, even when it was difficult or frightening. Life slowly returned to normal, but Ethan noticed a subtle change in his own perspective. He no longer saw life as predictable or limited. Every moment was now full of potential. Every day an opportunity to care, to act, and to connect. Max had transformed his world entirely. The once quiet man who had lived alone in a small apartment now walked through life with awareness, empathy, and courage. He noticed neighbors' struggles, offered help without hesitation, and connected with people he had previously ignored. The bond with Max had expanded beyond their apartment. It had touched the entire community. One afternoon, as Ethan took Max on a long walk through the town, they came across a stray dog lying by the side of the road. The dog was thin, scared, and shivering in the cold. Ethan knelt down instinctively, remembering the first time he had seen Max in the rain. The sight of the frightened animal filled him with the same compassion he had felt months ago. Max approached the dog cautiously, sniffing it gently and nudging it as if encouraging Ethan to act. Without hesitation, Ethan gathered the small dog in his arms and carried it home, knowing that he could make a difference again. Ethan's life had become a series of small but meaningful actions. Every time he cared for another living being, he discovered more about himself, about his capacity for love, patience, courage, and resilience. Max was no longer just a pet. He was a teacher, a guide, and a reminder that life's most profound lessons often come in simple, quiet ways. Together, they had faced challenges, embraced responsibility, and discovered joy in the smallest moments of connection. One evening, after a long day of caring for the new stray and reflecting on their journey, Ethan and Max sat together on the balcony, watching the sun set over the town. The sky was painted in shades of orange, pink, and purple, and the gentle breeze carried the scent of wet grass and blooming flowers. Ethan stroked Max's fur thoughtfully, realizing how different his life had become since that rainy night months ago. He had discovered courage, compassion, and purpose, all because he had chosen to help a small, trembling dog. Ethan also thought about the nature of destiny. One choice, one small act of kindness, had set off a chain of events that had reshaped his life entirely. If he had walked past Max that night, he would never have faced the challenges that had taught him so much. He would not have experienced the joy of helping others, the pride of facing fear, or the deep, unspoken connection that came from caring for another being. Max had changed his life in ways that could not be measured in words alone. As the sun disappeared below the horizon, Ethan whispered softly to Max, "You came into my life at the perfect moment, Max. You've taught me more than I could ever imagine." Max rested his head on Ethan's lap, eyes half closed, and let out a contented sigh. Ethan smiled, feeling a warmth in his heart that he had never known before. It was a quiet, steady joy that came from knowing that he had made the right choice, that he had embraced responsibility, and that he had lived with compassion. That night, as Ethan prepared for bed, he noticed Max pacing slightly, restless. He realized that Max, too, had learned courage from their experiences. The little dog had faced rain, injury, fear, and challenges, yet he remained loyal, loving, and brave. Their bond was no longer one-sided. It was a shared journey of growth, courage, and trust. Together, they had faced life's trials and emerged stronger, more connected, and more alive. Ethan drifted to sleep that night with Max curled at his feet, thinking about the fire, the injured paw, and the new stray they had rescued. He realized that life was unpredictable and sometimes difficult, but it was also full of opportunity. Opportunity to act with kindness, to embrace responsibility, and to build connections that could change destinies. Max had entered his life as a small, vulnerable creature, and in return, he had brought lessons, courage, and love that no human connection had ever offered. In the days that followed, Ethan continued to care for Max and the new stray, building a small routine that balanced work, care, and reflection. The community admired his dedication. Children followed him in the park, hoping to see the dogs, and neighbors sought his advice on caring for pets. But Ethan knew that the real lesson was not in recognition. It was in the quiet, steady understanding that life was most meaningful when lived with empathy, courage, and love. And so their story reached a peak, not with a single dramatic event alone, but through the culmination of small, meaningful choices. Ethan and Max had faced danger, uncertainty, and challenges together, and in doing so had discovered a bond that could not be broken. Every bark, every wag of a tail, every quiet night spent together reinforced the truth that life's greatest lessons often come from simple acts of care and compassion. Ethan looked at Max one evening, the little dog sitting loyally by his side, and whispered, "We've come so far together, boy, and I know there's so much more ahead." Max responded with a soft nuzzle, as if agreeing wholeheartedly. At that moment, Ethan understood that their journey was not just about survival or safety. It was about the courage to care, the joy of connection, and the power of one small choice to shape an entire destiny. Life settled into a new rhythm for Ethan and Max after the challenges they had faced together. The fire, the injured paw, and the new stray had changed them both, and yet their bond continued to grow stronger every day. Ethan had learned lessons he had never imagined, and Max had become not just a companion, but a true partner in life. Their story had reached a point where the quiet strength of everyday life mattered as much as the dramatic events that had tested their courage. Ethan began to notice the ways his life had changed in ways he had once thought impossible. He woke up earlier now, eager to greet the day with Max by his side. He made time for long walks, often exploring parts of town he had never visited before. Max's excitement during these walks was contagious, reminding Ethan to pay attention to the little things: the chirping of birds, the smell of fresh bread from the bakery, and the laughter of children playing in the park. Each day felt fuller, richer, and more meaningful than it ever had before. Ethan also began opening his heart to people in ways he had not done in the past. He struck up conversations with neighbors, offered help to those in need, and shared his experiences with the local community. At work, he was more patient with customers, often going out of his way to help them find what they needed. He had become more than just a quiet man who worked in a bookstore. He was someone others could rely on, someone who had learned through experience the value of kindness, courage, and trust. Max continued to teach him lessons every day. The little dog had an energy that was hard to ignore. He reminded Ethan to play, to laugh, and to enjoy the simple pleasures of life. Even small routines, like feeding him, brushing his fur, or giving him a gentle pat after a long day, became moments of joy and reflection. Ethan realized that these small moments were what made life truly meaningful. Through Max, he had discovered a form of happiness that could not be measured by success, wealth, or recognition. It came from love, care, and shared trust. One day, Ethan decided to take Max on a longer walk through the countryside beyond the town. The air was crisp, and the sky stretched wide and blue, dotted with fluffy white clouds. Max ran ahead, then returned frequently to check on Ethan, his tail wagging with pure joy. Ethan watched him, smiling, feeling a warmth in his heart he had never felt before. It struck him that this little dog had completely changed the way he saw the world. Life was no longer just about routine and comfort. It was about courage, care, and connection. As they walked, they encountered other animals in need. A small bird had fallen from its nest, and a neighbor's dog was stuck in a fence. Without hesitation, Ethan stepped in to help. Max, as always, seemed to guide him with his actions, nudging Ethan toward the right choices, barking gently as if to encourage him. These moments reminded Ethan that life was full of opportunities to act, to care, and to make a difference. Each small act of kindness brought joy not just to those being helped, but also to the helper. Ethan's relationships with people deepened as well. The little acts of compassion he displayed for animals began to ripple into the human connections in his life. He spent more time with friends he had neglected, helped neighbors with their problems, and even volunteered at the local animal shelter. People in town admired his dedication, but Ethan did not do it for recognition. He did it because he had learned the value of caring for someone beyond himself. Max had shown him that responsibility, love, and trust were not just feelings, they were actions. One quiet evening, as Ethan and Max sat on the balcony watching the sunset, he reflected on the journey they had taken together. He remembered the night of the rain, when he had first found Max trembling and alone. At the time, he had hesitated, unsure whether he was ready to take on the responsibility of caring for another life, and yet he had acted on impulse, driven by a small spark of compassion. That one choice had altered the course of both their lives, setting them on a path filled with lessons, love, and growth. Ethan realized that life's most meaningful moments often came from small, courageous choices. Choosing to help a frightened dog had taught him patience, responsibility, and courage. Choosing to care for Max during his injured paw had taught him empathy and persistence. Choosing to rescue the new stray had reinforced his understanding that kindness could change lives. Every decision, no matter how small it seemed at the time, had created a chain of events that shaped their destinies. Max, lying beside Ethan, seemed to understand his thoughts. The dog lifted his head, giving Ethan a soft lick on the hand, as if to remind him that he was loved and appreciated. Ethan smiled, realizing that Max's love was unconditional, pure, and transformative. In return, Ethan had learned to give that same love, not just to Max, but to the world around him. Together, they had created a life filled with joy, trust, and shared courage. As weeks turned into months, Ethan noticed changes in himself that went beyond his daily routines. He became more confident, more willing to take risks, and more open to new experiences. He applied for a part-time teaching role at a local library, sharing his love for books and reading with children. He helped organize community events to care for animals, and he even started small initiatives to help elderly neighbors with their daily tasks. Through all of these actions, Max remained by his side, a constant reminder of the lessons that had started on that rainy night. One day, Ethan received a letter from a former neighbor who had moved to another city. The letter spoke about how the stories of Ethan and Max had inspired them to adopt a dog and care for it with love and patience. Ethan felt a quiet satisfaction. He realized that the impact of his actions had spread beyond his own life, touching the lives of others in ways he had never imagined. Max had not only changed his life, together they had created a ripple of kindness and compassion in the world. Despite all the changes, Ethan and Max's bond remained simple and pure. Every morning began with a walk, every evening with shared, quiet moments. Ethan often reflected on how Max had taught him to slow down, notice the small details, and find joy in life's simplest pleasures. Max had shown him that life was not just about surviving, it was about living fully, loving deeply, and embracing responsibility with courage and patience. One rainy evening, similar to the night Ethan had first met Max, he watched the little dog sit at the bus stop they had discovered him at months ago. The memory of that night flooded his mind. The trembling, frightened animal, the silent plea for help, and the choice he had made to act. That single decision had shaped their lives in ways he could never have imagined. Max had grown into a confident, happy dog, and Ethan had grown into a man filled with empathy, courage, and love. Their destinies were forever intertwined. Ethan thought about the future with hope and excitement. He knew challenges would continue to come, as they always did in life, but he also knew that together he and Max could face anything. Max had been there during every trial, every moment of doubt, and every act of courage. The little dog had shown Ethan the value of trust, loyalty, and love. In return, Ethan had given Max safety, care, and a life filled with affection. Together, they had built a bond that was unbreakable. In the quiet of the night, Ethan sat beside Max, stroking his fur, and whispered softly, "You changed my life, Max, and I hope I've made yours better too." Max, as if understanding, rested his head on Ethan's lap and let out a soft sigh. Ethan felt a warmth spread through him, a mix of pride, love, and contentment. He realized that their story was not just about survival or courage or responsibility. It was about the small choices that define a life, the acts of kindness that ripple through time, and the power of love to transform destinies. From that day onward, Ethan and Max lived a life filled with adventure, joy, and compassion. They continued to explore the town, help those in need, and embraced the lessons that each day offered. Ethan had discovered that life was far more meaningful when lived with empathy, courage, and heart. Max had taught him to notice the small details, to act with kindness, and to love without condition. Their journey, which had started with a single plea on a rainy night, had grown into a lifelong story of courage, trust, and unbreakable companionship. And so Ethan often reflected on that first night with a smile. The dog who had asked, "Take me with you," please had changed not only his life but the lives of many around him. The choice to act, to care, and to open his heart had transformed him completely. Max had shown him that love and loyalty were not just feelings. They were actions, choices, and commitments that shaped the course of life. Together, they had discovered that the smallest acts of kindness could lead to the greatest joys, and the simplest bonds could create the most profound changes. As Ethan and Max settled down for the night, the world outside was quiet. Rain pattered gently against the windows, echoing the night they had first met. Ethan held Max close, thinking about all the moments, challenges, and lessons they had shared. He knew that their story would continue, filled with small adventures, shared courage, and endless love. And in that quiet, perfect moment, Ethan understood the truth of what he had learned all along, that one choice, made with compassion and courage, could truly change both their destinies forever.